Hey everyone, Scott Rusterholtz. Glad you're listening. Trying something a little bit new, as those of you who follow me on Twitter at Read and Learn are well aware, and hopefully it's where many of you are clicking from. I share a lot of political thoughts of the day and some analysis on issues there. Want to try launch it on a new platform, starting audio at first, and we'll see what this becomes. As a creative guy as I am, I'm calling this the Listen and Learn podcast versus Read and Learn on Twitter. Hopefully, it's somewhat entertaining. Try and keep it to about 10 minutes per day. Depending on demand, more or less. We're kind of playing it all by ear. Happy to see in the comments section any ideas you have on what can make it more interesting. But given all the new forms of media, it seems like a interesting chance to try and see if I can add value in some ways. Feel that there's some stories that are misreported or underreported in the news and try and provide a kind of analysis and spin from the way I see it. So we'll give it a go. Again, feel free to be brutally honest in the comments section. It's a learning experience, and hopefully we grow and make it a little bit better over time. But a couple of topics I want to hit off on the inaugural May 1st podcast. Begin, obviously, with the biggest story of the day, which is the budget deal. Safe to say, not really a major win for the Trump administration or Republicans in any way. Best case, I think you'd kind of describe it as pushing the fight to another day, which I actually think is the wise thing to do in this situation. So kind of the big events in the budget are you're pushing it off to September 30th. The government will continue to fund generally as is until then. There's no funding for the wall, so that's a win for the Democrats. There is, however, $1.5 billion of extra funding for border security, which I'd argue is a win for Trump and the Republicans. There will be no cut to Planned Parenthood funding, again, a win for the Democrats, but we'll be increasing defense spending by upwards of $25 billion. The Trump administration will have to give Congress a strategic plan on how to fight ISIS to unlock all of that money, which I think makes sense. We should have a strategic plan. And I think as we've begun to see in recent weeks with some of the bombing in Afghanistan, more bombing in ISIS, that a strategic plan to fully decimate them is taking hold. So some wins and losses for both sides. I think the big thing, though, is if you're the Republicans and specifically the Trump administration, you're beginning to roll out tax reform. You're trying to do something on healthcare. Now is not really the time to launch a major fight over funding the government, particularly when you really can't begin building the wall for a couple months until all the plans are made, and you can continue some planning during the next few months. And you really want to fight in September, by which time, hopefully, you've made some real progress on those two legislative fronts. I think Democrats also are looking at his approval rating numbers and saying he's incredibly vulnerable. But in reality, when you consider the media onslaught he's faced and the fact that Democrats have tried to delegitimize his victory, being in the 40s is not that surprising. And if Republicans can hold on to the special election in Georgia and Montana, some of the fever may break in the Democratic camp, particularly amongst those senators who represent Trump states like Joe Manchin and Claire McCaskill, who are up for re-election next year. And they'll be open to fund more of a compromise spending bill in next September. Or at least maybe even on the debt ceiling, which should expire sometime between September 1st and November 1st. It's a little bit of a guessing game, but you have two chances there to try and extract a concession on the border wall and more defense spending in Planned Parenthood. And it just makes sense tactically to push off that fight until then. But I think that should have no problem passing later this week. At best, it's a push for both sides, and now the Republicans really have a show me. You can very logically argue they should have pushed off this fight to September. I think it was the right thing to do, but that makes this fight in September all the more important to push through some of those big campaign promises from Trump, particularly on the wall. Next biggest story, Affordable Health Care Act. It seems like it's getting closer to passing, but far from certain. As a reminder, last week there was a compromise between the moderates and Tom MacArthur and the House Freedom Caucus that would give states more flexibility from avoiding some of the onerous Obamacare regulations. Key thing is Republicans can only lose 22 votes. They were probably 10, 15 votes shy of that last time when they had to pull the bill in mid-March. You probably have picked up 5 or 6 conservatives, but it's unclear if you've really picked up any moderates. So they're still probably half a dozen short. I think, honestly, passage at this point is 50-50. And the moderates in the Republican caucus need to determine whether or not they're going to stick up to the campaign promise and reform and repeal Obamacare. Key thing for them should be to recognize that the Senate is going to make some adjustments along the way. So the House will have another vote at this. And if you're a moderate Republican like a Mike Kaufman in Colorado who's on the fence, I think you have to say, let's push the ball forward. This has been a campaign promise for 7 years. Get it to the Senate. They can make some changes. And then from there, you can have another vote on the final package. So if you're represented by one of those Republicans who are on the fence, like a Kaufman or a Lance in New Jersey, I think you probably want to reach out to them and say, this has been a campaign promise for 7 years. This bill cuts taxes by $1 trillion. It cuts spending by $1 trillion. It eliminates onerous regulation and gives states the opportunity to opt out so long as it lowers premiums on other regulations. They should be voting yes and advancing the bill. Unfortunately, it looks like it's only a 50-50 proposition would be my guess. I think if they're not passing it this week, prospects for it are pretty dim, given that the House will be out on vacation. Yes, another vacation. It's pretty good to be a congressman for another week, and that might just kill any momentum, at which point Republicans need to move on to tax reform, because we need to get something that gets the economy going and showing voters that we're executing on the power we were given. The other story that I think is kind of interesting and is the outrage over the weekend that Trump invited Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte to the White House for a visit. Now, Duterte is eccentric, if not a bad guy. He's promised to launch vigilante killings on drug dealers in his country, and probably several thousand people have been killed outside of the judicial system, which is unacceptable. Here's the challenge, though. He has made overtures to China and is seeking some economic deals with them. And we need to view this within a broader landscape where the South China Sea is increasingly a battlefield for the 21st century. Trillions of dollars of trade go through there every year. And it's important for the U.S. to maintain its ring of alliances from Japan down to the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, up through Thailand and Vietnam, and maintain a block of allies to deter China, which is trying to claim the entire sea of its own and ensure free passage of goods that go here and to Europe, rather than having China claim it all as its own territory, which could be incredibly disruptive for international trade. So you have a Philippines that has historically been an American ally, that is home to important military bases of ours, and it's making overtures to China. And China would love to pick off American allies one by one and eliminate our influence in Asia. And unfortunately, as we realized during the Cold War, sometimes you have to do business with rough guys when looking at the broader geopolitical picture. I think that's the case here. The Philippines is a critical ally. They're already trying to play us off of China, and we can't just cede that alliance to the Chinese and risk eliminating the resolve we've built in Asia against their aggression in the South China Sea. So while he's an unseemly character, he's an unseemly character that we have to deal with. So I think some of that outrage from the media is ridiculous, and we shouldn't find that surprising. I think over this weekend at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, you had Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein fame from the Nixon Watergate tapes, saying that no president has ever lied as Trump has, which is just on its face farcical. When you consider he of all people should realize that it was Nixon creating a constitutional crisis over lying about tapes. You had President Obama pass a massive healthcare bill that completely altered a sixth of our economy on the fake promise that no one's healthcare plans or doctors would be canceled, when the exact opposite happened. You've seen nothing on that scale with Trump. We're just in a situation where the media wants to believe the president is destroying the country and is going there before any of the facts suggested. And that's why media approval is at all-time lows. And then the last little interesting story of the day out of CNN, and you hear rumblings elsewhere, is that a Supreme Court justice retirement is likely in the near future. The guess is either it'll be Thomas or Kennedy. If it's Thomas and is replaced with a conservative, it doesn't change the balance of the court, but it does replace Thomas with a younger conservative, which extends the life of the conservative bench on the court. Or if it's Kennedy, though, who is almost a one-man dictator, able to swing the vote on every critical issue, replacing him with a true conservative would be a shift to the court to the right, and perhaps lay the groundwork for 10, 15 years down the road, even being able to repeal Roe versus Wade. So that would be a massive fight over the summer, you could be certain, in Congress. But this again gets to the fact why you saw Trump do so well with evangelical voters, better even than George W. Bush did in his reelection, that they saw an opportunity here to really shift the balance of the Supreme Court. And Trump with Gorsuch has already paid dividends, and he's going to continue to. So those kind of the three biggest stories I saw today. If you think I missed out on any, please include them in the comments below. And like I said, hopefully this is an interactive forum that grows over time. And hopefully I get a little bit better at it. And I'll be happy to hear any of your thoughts. So have a great night.